Okay, so we're going to now lay out the paradox of identity, which is specifically the ship of Theseus puzzle. So the paradox starts with a story. So the story's got two parts, part A and part B. So here's part A. Over the course of a year, Theseus, an ancient Greek, meticulously maintains what we can call the original ship. Got it capitalized, original ship. As a given plank begins to rot, Theseus, who's a famously prudent man, immediately replaces it with a new plank. By the end of the year, none of the planks composing the original ship, let's call those collectively all the planks that compose the original ship at the beginning of this process, planks 1 through 500, all of those planks, none of them remain at the end of this process. One by one, Theseus has replaced first plank number 1 with a new plank, plank number 2 with a new plank, and so on. By the end of the year, none of planks 1 through 500 remain. Instead, the ship now standing in Theseus' shipyard, let's call it the maintained ship, is composed of entirely different planks. Call them planks 501 through 1000. Those are distinct planks from the planks that he started with. So that's part A of the story. The ship undergoes this process of maintenance. Single plank is replaced little by little. Theseus is very careful. He's doing it according to a plan that he laid out. And what's most important, or perhaps most important, is that he's also very careful to preserve the shape and structure of the original ship. So the maintained ship, the one at the end of the process, looks exactly the same as the original ship. It's in the same place, made with the same blueprint. It just now is composed of completely different planks. Here's the first premise. We can now state it. The original ship is numerically identical with the maintained ship. So here's the reason for that. Here's what we can call defense of that claim. Obviously, the original ship survived the loss of just one plank, right? When Theseus took off one rotting plank and replaced it with a new one, it was still the same ship. When he set sail later that day, people, said, look, there goes Theseus' ship. They didn't say something wrong just because one of the planks was different. But then, of course, the same reasoning should hold for the second plank, and the third plank, and the fourth plank. As long as the planks are replaced one at a time, very carefully in succession, according to a plan, at the end of the process, even if all of the planks are different from the original planks, it's still the same ship, numerically. It's got the same size, shape, and again, the neighbors will look out and say, there goes Theseus sailing his ship. They're not going to be wrong. It's the same ship, identical numerically as the original ship. So the maintained ship is numerically identical with the original ship. Okay, that's the first half of the story, but the story has a part B. Part B is important. Everything that was described in part A, that process of maintenance, that's all still true, but part A is incomplete. For part A failed to mention what Theseus did with the rotting planks 1 through 500, as he removed them. Part B of the story is going to fill in those missing details. As it turns out, here's part B, Theseus is so prudent that while he was maintaining the original ship, he was also reusing each of the rotten planks 1 through 500, to construct a backup ship, just in case, to be used only in the most dire of emergencies. At the end of the year, this was all missing from part A of the story, but it was all going on. Part B is filling in these details. At the end of that year, Theseus actually has 2 ships in his shipyard. The maintained ship from part A, which is composed of the new planks 501 through 1000, and then he's got another ship, call it the rotten ship, which is composed of rotting planks 1 through 500 that he built one at a time again, carefully so that it looks just like the original ship, except it's now, I don't know, got some rotten spots in it. So he's got these two ships side by side composed of different planks. That's part B. Premise 2 says the original ship is numerically identical with the rotten ship. Here's the thought. The original ship is composed of all and only planks 1 through 500. The rotten ship is also composed of all and only planks 1 through 500. So the original ship and the rotten ship are composed of exactly the same planks. Moreover, Theseus was careful to preserve the original ship's size, shape, and structure as he rebuilt the rotten ship. So except for the patches of rot, the rotten ship and the original ship look exactly the same. So surely they're numerically identical. They have no parts that are different from one another. They look exactly the same. Of course, they're the same ship. That's premise 2. Here's premise 3. You can maybe see this coming. Therefore, the maintained ship is numerically identical with the rotten ship. So the maintained ship is the ship at the end of the process of maintenance, composed of planks 501 through 1,000. The rotten ship is the ship that Theseus has been plank by plank building out of the old rotten planks 1 through 500. So where's premise 3 coming from? Well, here's the defense of premise 3. Numerical identity is transitive. This is like the transitive property in math. So transitivity of numerical identity says this: if A is numerically identical with B and B is numerically identical with C, then A is numerically identical with C. So premise 1 said that the original ship is numerically identical with the maintained ship. And then premise 2 said that the original ship is numerically identical with the rotten ship. So it just follows from the principle of the transitivity of numerical identity that the rotten ship is numerically identical with the maintained ship, and vice versa. Okay, here's premise 4. Obviously, the maintained ship is not numerically identical with the rotten ship. After all, look, they're in different locations, right? They're side by side, yes, but they're in different parts of the shipyard. One of them is rotten, one isn't, and they're composed of completely different planks. If you're still not convinced, though, let's add a final wrinkle to the story. Call it part C of the story, again, that we didn't mention, but that was part of the original story. So to see why the maintained ship and the rotten ship are not numerically identical, part C in the story goes on to say this: a few months after finishing construction of both the maintained ship and the rotten ship, Theseus goes through some financial difficulties. I don't know, maybe there's a recession that hits ancient Greece. He decides, in order to survive, he's got to sell one of the ships that he's built in order to keep his home. But Theseus is really a sentimentalist at heart, and he's really particularly attached to planks 1 through 500. Over the years, he begins to realize he spent so much time with those old planks. It would be such a shame to sell them to someone else. So he sells the maintained ship and keeps the rotten ship. Here's the important part. The new owner of the maintained ship immediately sets sail for the other side of the world, never to be seen or heard from again. While the rotten ship sits there in Theseus' shipyard. So surely the maintained ship, now sailing in uncharted waters hundreds of miles away from Greece, is not numerically identical with the rotten ship sitting back in Theseus' shipyard. They're clearly different ships. To make it even more vivid, suppose that the new owner of the maintained ship has a tragic wreck and the thing sinks to the bottom of the sea. Then the maintained ship doesn't exist anymore, but the rotten ship does. So clearly they're not identical. So now we can conjoin premise 3 and premise 4, both of which we defended. And here's the conclusion. Therefore, the maintained ship is numerically identical with the rotten ship, and it is not the case that the maintained ship is numerically identical with the rotten ship. But that's a contradiction. The conclusion is A is identical with B, and it is false that A is identical with B. It's both true and false. That's a contradiction, so we have a paradox here. The argument's valid, and each premise appears plausible. I gave you defenses of each of them, but it's led us to a contradiction involving identity. So the Ship of Theseus paradox is a paradox involving identity and some very simple, a very simple rule about the transitivity identity and a clever little story, and we've run into a contradiction. So as before, in each of these paradoxes, we're going to have to reject one or more of the premises. And that's what we'll discuss in the next video, possible solutions to the Ship of Theseus paradox.